Um, Question 1. I have questions for you guys to get to know everyone. Put in the chat box what type of organization you work for or you volunteer for. So is it historical? Is it genealogical? Are you a different type of nonprofit? Let's see. Lots of historical programs. Awesome. County government, genealogical. Awesome. I'm glad to see so many different groups of people around. And we have a second question. Do you have a volunteer program? This could be anything from just you have somebody sitting at the front desk, or you have nothing at all and this is brand new to you. Awesome. It looks like everybody at least has a little bit of a basics. Prior to COVID, yes, understand. We feel the same way. Awesome. Cool. Well, we have a pretty big mix of different types of people here and different organizations. So hopefully you will all glean something from this. So to begin, we have to know what type of volunteers we might try to get. So volunteers can be retirees, students, or professionals. Retirees could be anybody that is a teacher. They could be somebody that worked in a very specific field and is now retired and is wanting to give their skills. Students are often looking for volunteer opportunities, especially for honor societies, and to build up their resume. They often need some type of community service to bolster that. And professionals, this is a group that is underrepresented, I think, and a lot of groups don't think about this, but large corporations often ask their employees to serve in the community. That is part of their contract, or they get to match donations, things like that. So that is a really great group of people to tap that we might not think about. The definition of a volunteer from Merriam-Webster is a person who voluntarily undertakes or expresses a willingness to undertake a service. So that's an important thing to know when you're trying to decide who you want to reach, what you want to do with your volunteers, know exactly what they are. Why do people volunteer? This will help you reach new people. This will help you understand why they do it. That way you can know what areas you need to reach. So people might want to meet new people. They may be new to the area, have no idea about the community. Volunteering is a great way to be part of the community, because usually those that are volunteering are very pivotal in the community. They may be wanting to buff up their resume. This is particularly important for the students. They may want to just help their community with nothing else. They just love their area, or they've been around for a long time and they see some areas that have specific needs. They may want to gain new skills. This is something that I think a lot of volunteer programs don't look at, but maybe a volunteer wants to learn how to use Microsoft Office, so they'll come and volunteer and work at the front desk to learn that. Or their employer requires volunteer hours. This is something I mentioned in the last slide. But volunteer hours are required, but don't discount those volunteers. This could end up bringing a lot of passion for the organization to that person who is volunteering, and they may want to start volunteering outside of those required hours. And this could breed some excitement for the people that they come in contact with as well. Why do organizations want volunteers? They can bring a specific set of skills. This is really important for those specific projects that not everyone has the skills to fix. Like, do you need your windows reglazed? Or do you need somebody that knows how to do accounting? They can also take on tasks that will free up paid staff to work on larger projects. Now, this does not mean that volunteers take the part of paid staff. They do not replace paid staff. They just help the paid staff do their job a little bit better. And even if you don't have paid staff, but you have unpaid staff, but are not volunteers, you still don't want to take those jobs away from the staff by using volunteers. But they do help make things run a little bit more efficiently. Volunteers can bring new energy and new ideas to the organization. Just because they're volunteers, don't discount their ideas. They have a different type of experience than many of us have. They come from a different background. They may have some really, really good ideas for like fundraising or programming that you never would have thought of, but you want to make sure that they're in an environment that breeds the excitement of trying to get new ideas and new energy out there. And then lastly, volunteers can serve as a great face for the organization as they are connected to the community. This is a particularly important point because volunteers are the community. And when the community sees people that are really excited about your organization and what you do and your mission, that's going to want to bring others into the fold as well. It shows that you guys are doing good work, and it shows that there is more involvement than just the paid staff or unpaid staff that are there. So we have the whys and the whos, but is your organization ready for volunteers? This is not a little task. To successfully run a volunteer program, it's more than just, can you come in and work this day or that day? You want to end up having a solid foundation and a solid program to keep it running and to get more volunteers in, because when you have some volunteers that are happy, they will ask more people to come in and volunteer with them, and et cetera, et cetera. So the first point, are staff willing to work with volunteers? This may seem kind of like a no-brainer, but if you are in a situation where you have all worked the same way, worked with the same people, new things haven't happened, it may be difficult to get volunteers in the door and have the staff happy to work with them. The staff are an integral part of the volunteers' experience. So if the staff is not happy with having volunteers, the volunteers probably won't come back. Staff will have to train the volunteers and give them tasks and essentially watch over them to make sure they're doing what they're supposed to be doing. So the staff has to be on board. Speaking of board, is the board willing to bring in volunteers into the organization? Your board is your governing body, and you don't want to step on their toes. Volunteers do bring in new liability. That liability is definitely worth it, I think, but it is a liability, and it does cost money to bring in volunteers. You wouldn't think so, but it costs man hours, it costs training materials, it costs in those things. So you definitely want to pass this by your board before you start any type of volunteer program. So who and how will the volunteer program be managed? This could be anywhere from the whole staff is on board and everybody helps a little bit, or it could be one volunteer program manager. In my personal experience, I have found it's better when there is like one, maybe two people in charge of the volunteer program. That way there isn't too much confusion. The volunteer program manager will be in charge of contacting volunteers, keeping their contact info, taking down numbers. The numbers thing is important for grant writing and stuff like that, but that's for next week's webinar. And the volunteer program manager will make sure that your volunteers feel safe and comfortable, that they are happy with where they're at. So the manager is really important in a successful volunteer program. So you need to make sure that you have a dedicated person or a couple of people involved and everyone's on the same page on that. How much will it cost to bring in volunteers? For each organization, this will be different. If you're wanting to bring in one person to work the front desk, that's going to be negligible. If you want to bring in people who are doing landscaping work, they may be volunteering their time, but are they volunteering the materials? Are you teaching them and using man hours to teach them how to properly landscape or properly do some type of historic renovation? There's a lot of different variables in there, but that is something that needs to be addressed and talked about before the implementation of the program. And finally, what is the intended impact of these volunteers? Before you go out in the big world to try to find your volunteers, and before you start having them do things, you want to know what the impact is. Are you wanting volunteers to go out into the community and bring more people in? Are you simply wanting somebody that can be the face of the organization at the front desk or that can answer the phone? Do you need volunteers to run around with school children when that ever can happen again, when you have school groups coming into your organization? The impact is an important step to know who you want to bring in, how you want to bring them in, how many people you want to bring in. So those are all really important points. I know I'm overloading you with a lot of info, but once you get into it, it's not that bad. So here is a readiness checklist. These are things to check off to make sure your organization is ready to start this. Now, every one of these can be really intense and really detailed, or it can just be very basic. So the first one is written job descriptions. You want this both to protect the organization and the volunteer. This is important to match a volunteer with what they want to do. You don't want to put a volunteer in a place they're not comfortable or doing something they don't like. With written job descriptions, a volunteer can look through and say, oh, I like that one, let's do that one. But it also protects them so staff don't end up asking more than what they signed up for and then making that an uncomfortable environment for the volunteer. You also want a volunteer handbook. This would have a lot of the same stuff that your employee handbook would have. Basics of your ethics, your uniform, if there is a type of uniform, how you want your employees or volunteers to act. This is just a way for the volunteer to fall back on. If they have a question, they can maybe go back to the handbook and that is answered for them rather than having to chase down a staff member, stuff like that. Your mission and vision statements should be up to date. Now, this should be that way anyway, but I also know it's difficult to keep up with all of the paperwork and such that comes with running a historical organization. If your mission and vision statements are not up to date, then that will be difficult to bring in volunteers that meet that mission. You want to make sure that your volunteers agree with the mission or at least understand the mission and vision. If somebody is the complete polar opposite, you may not want them at your front desk who may be telling the public things that you don't or the organization does not agree with or align with. So just make sure those are up to date and make sure that that's in the handbook and make sure that your volunteers know about it. The staff has been trained to work with volunteers. This can be a very basic thing of just telling your staff to be nice to your volunteers and that they are part of the organization, although they are volunteering, they're part of it, and that they should be able to come to the staff with questions. Or it can be a very intensive, like couple day training retreat, whatever your organization feels like it needs. There should be a difference between paid and volunteer positions. And I mentioned that on the last slide as well. Paid positions should not be taken over by volunteer. And I understand right now in COVID, that makes it very difficult. And sometimes things like that happen. But do the best you can to make sure that there's a difference, because if somebody's getting paid, they're not going to want a volunteer to start taking over their job. They just want that volunteer to be there to assist them and make the organization as a whole better. You also need to have a training plan in place. This is a plan for docents to teach them how to go around the historical home you may have and give their tour. Or this could be teaching the front desk worker how to answer the phone, transfer calls, answer emails, ring things up. This could be training somebody who wants to work in the archives how to properly handle archival materials. It doesn't have to be a crazy plan, but having a plan in place will make sure all of the staff knows what they're supposed to be doing and supposed to be training, but it also makes sure that nothing gets missed in the mix. And finally, a recognition plan. Everybody likes to be told thank you, especially volunteers, because they are giving their time and their knowledge and their expertise. So you want to have some type of recognition plan in place. You don't want to get to the end of the year and go, oh no, we haven't done anything. Let's scramble and make something work. This could be simple thank you notes written by the staff, or it could be a big to-do party of, you know, promoting volunteers to leadership positions, or it could be just a simple thank you at the end of their service. So it just depends on your organization, but these are all things to keep in mind when you are starting to create your program. So we're going to work on some breakout rooms right now. I would like your group to spend some time discussing potential projects for volunteers that your organization has noticed. So have you noticed we need somebody at the front? Have you noticed we need somebody to glaze windows, or we need somebody to organize the archives room? So just go ahead and take some time amongst yourselves to discuss what you think you need to do.
So we have, Annie, we have 15 people in the meeting,
Okay.
including you and I. Do you want, what do you think, 2 rooms or 3? I feel like 3 is probably, but.
Let's do 3. 3 sounds good.
Okay. Give me a second here.
Mm-hmm.
And there they are. All right. And
do I need to stop sharing?
I don't think so. So recreate. Automatically recreating all rooms. 2. Okay, there we go. So you've all been invited, and I think you have to click the option to join the room.
and returning.
That should be everybody back.
Okay, perfect. So how was that, everyone? Did we get some good ideas? If anybody wants to share, feel free to. You can either stick it in the chat box or you can unmute. We'll take a couple minutes.
Well, I was given a lead on some grant money for volunteers for a project that I'm working on, so that was very helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, that's a good point to make. Yeah, grants are important. We love grants.
Yeah, I say to tell everybody, I mentioned the Ohio Local History Alliance digital preservation grant. And Betsy, I could not off the top of my head remember the deadlines for that. I was thinking February is the application deadline. But those are specifically for digitization projects, which is what Bob had mentioned. So that's a yearly grant.
Awesome. In our group, we mentioned a little bit about a volunteer job fair. If you're having trouble just connecting with volunteers or getting any of those groups, we talked about, having an open house and specifically gearing it towards volunteers. Come in, we have free cookies, and also please sign up and volunteer. So try to bring people in with something. What was that? Oh, I thought somebody said something. So that was just another idea we had. Does anybody else want to share?
Hang on, sorry, having some technical difficulties with the unmute button.
Gotcha.
Our group had a few issues with sound, but generally we discussed what kinds of projects we have for our volunteers. A lot of us, I feel like volunteers tend to come and find us a little bit more, but I'm not sure, I don't want to speak for everyone. I do like the idea of the volunteer job fair. That sounds like a lot of fun.
Right. Yeah, definitely volunteers will come and find you if they need hours and specifically, but that's when you want to try to reach out to those underserved communities. A lot of those are young professionals in that group. They don't have the time necessarily to go out and find things, so a job fair can help promote bringing in communities that may not be served right now. Okay, we're gonna continue on with the PowerPoint. Let's see. Okay, you have volunteers, they're in the door. Now what do we do with them, right? So you first want to have a training or an orientation. Even if they won't be working with the public, give them a tour of the site with the history. That way, if they're ever accidentally pulled to the side and say, hey, do you know the history of this? You can the volunteer can at least point them in the right direction to find that information. It makes them feel more welcome and more part of the organization if they know about the place they are working. Training can be formal or informal depending on the position and number of volunteers. Again, I keep going back to the front desk worker, but that person is really, really important. If you just have one new volunteer that's coming in to do that, that training can be very informal. However, if you have like a big group of volunteers that are coming in to all do different things, you might want to do a more formal training of sitting down for an hour and talking about the requirements and going over the handbook and stuff like that. So definitely depending on the situation, it could be formal or informal, but it still needs to happen. If you can, you should provide some customer service training, even if this position isn't explicitly with the public. Customer service training is really important because your volunteers are the face of your organization. So this could be, yet again, a very informal, a very basic training. It could be formal webinars or, you know, a day-long camp, something like that, depending on what the position is. But you want your volunteers to know how to interact with the public. Even if they aren't working directly with the public, there is a good chance they will run into somebody doing a tour, or they will be helping with an event that is with the public, and you want them to be a good face for your organization. Safety training, that's also really important. They need to know where the emergency numbers are, the first aid kits, where the fire extinguishers are, and what your emergency evacuation plans are. Hopefully you have them. If you don't, I definitely recommend you work on that. And I understand, especially with historical sites, it's very difficult to get an emergency preparedness plan put together. There's a lot of things to think about, but your volunteers should always at least have a basic understanding of what happens if there's a fire. Who do we need to call first? Do we need to grab something? And what exits can we use? Do things get locked off? Things like that. And if you can, provide further education and training opportunities. This could be anywhere from, oh, we know of a free volunteer workshop webinar. Would you like to be part of it? Or it could be a week-long training from a museum organization. And if you have the ability to provide that, that definitely will make your volunteers feel more welcome, more a part of it, but it's also showing that you as an organization value their education as well. What skills do your volunteers need or already have? Do they have a specialized skill? Do they need a specialized skill? That's something to keep in mind. For, like, I keep going back to glazing windows because we just had a volunteer do that, but do you need your windows glazed and you know somebody that can do it and has the equipment? You want to tap into that, definitely. Do they have access to specialized equipment? Do you need to have a special drill bit to do something and you know a volunteer has that? Do they need to have computer skills, especially if they're working at the front desk and doing database entry, which many volunteers do? They need to know how to do that, or they have to have the ability to be trained to do that. This is just a list, very brief list of things that they may need or may already have that you want to tap into. Social media is also really important right now as well. So if you can get a volunteer that knows how to do social media, tap into that, definitely. Do your volunteers have limitations? This is something to consider, especially because a lot of us work with populations that are older and they may have some physical limitations. Do they have problems going upstairs? You don't want them to be in charge of running up to go turn on the lights upstairs if they can't do stairs. Do they have a preference with the age groups they work with? If they really don't like children, you don't want to put them in charge of the school group. If they would prefer to work with children, like they're retired teachers, put them with the kids because they know how to handle kids and work with kids. Do they want to work alone? Are they somebody that wants to just be given a task and they work on it and they're doing their own thing? You might put them in your archive or in your collections room. Or are they specifically volunteering to work with the public? Then you want them to be in a public-facing role. And then do they have time constraints? You know, do they have kids to go pick up after school at some point in time, whenever that happens? Do they have to go to work? You know, are they only volunteering like on their lunch hour or in between jobs or something like that? That's something to keep in mind. That does not mean you should turn people away that have any of these things. Please don't. They're still very, very valuable, and you can work around those limitations because everybody brings a very important role to the museum, whatever volunteer they are. And utilization, this is an important one. Make sure that your volunteer is comfortable in their position. If they aren't really happy, they're not going to perform very well and they may leave, and you don't want that to happen. You want your volunteer to be very comfortable and happy with what they're doing. If they seem like they're hesitant, don't be afraid to move them to another project if you think it will fit better if you think they will fit better somewhere else. You know, maybe they started off working in the archive because they thought they wanted to work with historical documents, but really they want to work with the public. So don't be afraid to switch around their roles to fit what they want to do. Again, use specialized skills where you can. Don't draw from the same well every time. I know this is difficult, especially if you only have 1 or 2 volunteers that are regulars, but this can very quickly lead to burnout. And you don't want your volunteers to burn out on helping you. You know, don't call the same 1 or 2 retired teachers to bake cookies for the bake sale. You know, you definitely want to give them a variety of tasks, but you also need to use a variety of volunteers. Volunteers often have fantastic ideas. Don't dismiss them simply because they are volunteers. This is something we touched on a little bit earlier, but they can really bring fresh new ideas to the organization. And even if they're volunteers, you should listen to them, because that could completely change the outlook of your organization. If you, and this is in relation mostly to large events, if you do not have something for them to work on, tell them this and ask them to come back another time. If you, for some reason, ask 20 volunteers to be at this massive event, but only half the people showed up you thought would, and you only need 10 volunteers, send the other 10 home and say, we will use you another time. Thank you for your time. We really appreciate it, but we also value your time and we don't want you to just sit around. Asking somebody to just sit around and twiddle their thumbs is going to turn them off from volunteering again. So just make sure that you communicate with your volunteers. And appreciation. This is a really big one. A simple verbal appreciation does go a long way. This makes them feel wanted, you know, that they are an important part of the team. Formal thank you notes are always nice. Full appreciation events, that can be helpful. It can also be costly. So that's something to keep in mind when you are deciding to bring on volunteers, what kind of appreciation you want to do. This could be a Christmas party that the staff has, but you also invite the volunteers, or it could be volunteer only. You could do a volunteer award ceremony to give away, you know, plaques for the best volunteer of the year, volunteer of the month. This could also lead to promotions for the volunteers into leadership roles. Especially if your volunteer has been around for a while, you definitely want to promote them to some type of leadership role to show that you understand that they know what they're doing and that you trust them. It can be a helpful way of, and a little thing of making them feel more wanted. So appreciation is one of the most important parts of a volunteer program. Okay, so those were our basics. Do you guys have any questions? This is the time to ask them. I'm open to anything you have on your mind.
Can you hear me?
I can. Hi, Mary.
Oh, okay, because I can't figure out how to get myself on there, but that's all right. I heard everything. I've been writing like a crazy person over here.
Gotcha. Let's see. Did we have any questions in the chat?
Well, the only thing I have from the chat is Bob had asked about suggestions for a volunteer manual.
Okay. I would do some Googling and to see if you can find any museum specific ones. They are out there. I don't have any readily available to put in the chat right now, but they are definitely out there. AAM probably has one. They're not,
being the American Association of Museums, American Alliance for Museums.
Thank you. I forget and I just say these things.
My life has so many acronyms, I've learned to define all of them.
Right. So definitely just do some Googling and see what fits your organization, you know, piece and part some together. They don't have to be word for word.
And it looks like Ron Marvin has some volunteer manuals that he might be able and willing to share.
Perfect. What do you do with volunteers who are dealing with possibly dementia? That is a very difficult topic, and I completely understand. Um, don't turn them away by any means, unless it's getting to a point where they may need to go somewhere else. But speak with the families, see what they feel comfortable with as well, but also treat them like humans. They are still people that have feelings and thoughts. Maybe ask them to be in charge of just greeting, simple greetings. It kind of definitely depends on what's going on, but approach it with love and sympathy. And remember that that person has been with you probably for quite a while, and that they can still contribute something.
I actually have a question. Hi, this is Miranda. In going through all of this, at least my organization, we very clearly need a little bit more standard training for ours. Though a lot of our volunteers, their projects are very specific to them and their interests. Are there any good training materials that you can recommend for kind of the broad spectrum of either museums or archival type shenanigans?
Right. I again plug the American Alliance for Museums. They have a lot of good stuff, but I also realize that there is a paywall behind that. Betsy, do you know of any specific ones? I know I used a lot of AAM stuff when I was going through this.
Volunteer training. I would actually look at the American Association for State and Local History. They may have either, they may have volunteer training information in there. They have a resources page that includes their technical leaflets. And if the technical leaflet is more than, I think, 3 or 4 years old, it is actually free, even if you don't have a membership. So that is a good place to start.
Volunteer Match also has some very good resources. And you can also use Volunteer Match to try to find volunteers. Ding. But they have some training videos on there that I have used in the past.
Hi, this is Miranda again. You actually just reminded me, this isn't so much a question, but more of a comment. Oh dear, I'm forgetting the actual proper name instead of just the acronym, but there is an organization called ORAB. They work with the Association of County Records Managers and Archivists, and their goal is preservation for historic paper and things. They actually just started this year a recognition program. You can nominate a volunteer from your organization. They get a plaque and I think $180 towards preservation training and that kind of stuff, like a little scholarship sort of a thing.
Awesome.
That is the Ohio Historical Records Advisory Board.
Thank you. I couldn't remember all, like I know all of those words are in there, but
it's a lot.
The alphabet soup.
I can't always remember it either, but today I look smart.
That's a really good point to make, actually. And looks like in the chat, Ronald said one of the financial considerations for volunteers is who will pay for background checks so they can work with children. Vulnerable populations, they require training, both the elderly and children. So that's something to keep in mind. I think that's why we usually tap the retired teachers if we can, because they already have gone through all of that training. But just because it may cost a little bit to get their background check done does not mean you shouldn't try to make it work if you can financially, because they can still bring a lot of really cool stuff to the organization.
And then there was another question in the chat, kind of, is there some sort of standard for volunteer recognition hours, you know, like 30 hours in a mug, 50 hours in a t-shirt?
Right. I have not come across any type of standard. It definitely depends on your budget. That's really what it comes down to. Whatever you feel comfortable doing. I have found that if nothing else, just an appreciation dinner at the end that's catered could end up being more cost effective than mugs throughout or something like that throughout the year. But one big thing at the end of the year has definitely gone over very well for us.
We have done pins for certain amounts of hours, like 100-hour pin, 200-hour pin. I think
Right.
we go by hundreds and then thousands, and our highest is like 4,000 hours.
Wow.
But
That's a good
it's just,
volunteer.
it's all from, you know, just a certain company that we just, yeah, but that's something that they look forward to. They know how many they're working towards,
Right. That's a good point.
and they wear them all.
Well,
So-
that's cool. But that also can show the public that like they know what they're talking about because they've been around for a while. Does anybody else have any questions, comments? Okay. It looks like Ronald put in again that at previous sites, they've been asked by local probation officers to provide community service projects for adults and juveniles. He said this was a difficult situation, but we primarily use them for outdoor projects or at large programs. Yeah, I can imagine that is a difficult situation to be in, but I do appreciate that you were still able to make that work. That's another place that you could tap. That's not thought about often, but they need those hours too, and you guys possibly need the bodies to do something. Even if it is manual labor, working outside, that's okay. They're getting to do something. So that's a good point, Ron. Thank you.
I know that one of the Ohio Local History Alliance board members is a big advocate for working with Boy Scouts. At his particular site, he's had good luck with various, you know, volunteer projects with Boy Scout troops. And then if you can get hooked up with someone who's working on an Eagle Scout project, and you can
Yes.
become their Eagle Scout project in some fashion, that's that is an option.
That's a very good point. Eagle Scouts need to put a lot of effort into their projects, so try to get those guys.
I know that our community, our United Way, manages a volunteer website where people can put projects in. And I know we've put stuff on there before if we needed like a specific project. So that's something to look at too. If your local United Way might have and might be able to connect you with volunteer groups or people
Right.
that need them.
That's awesome.
We have used our juvenile court where they need service hours, especially for outside work around the museum, quite effectively.
Awesome. Yep, that's a good group to look at. Definitely. Yep, it looks like somebody also has used Eagle Scouts for several years. I've worked with Eagle Scouts and they definitely have to, there's a lot of work involved with it. So if they can get on one of your projects, that would be a big benefit. Anybody else? Okay. Well, if that's it, I would like to thank you all for coming. I appreciate it a lot. You know, this was my first webinar, so I hope you guys learned something from this. It was good seeing all of your faces, and I hope you all can take this to your organizations and put together a good volunteer program. Thank you.
Thank you, Annie.
And we
Thank
will
you.
we will be posting the video on the Ohio Local History Alliance's YouTube page, and I will send out a link to all of you and everyone who registered. So give me a couple of days to figure out how to actually get it onto YouTube, but
It'll be there
yeah,
eventually.
it will be there.
Actually, I have a really quick question for you on that one. Next week, Friday, for the next bit of the series, I will actually not be able to attend. If I go ahead and register, can I still get the link to the YouTube video so I can
Yes.
watch the webinar after?
Yep.
Cool.
Yes.
Thank you.
Please do that. Yep. All right. We will see you. Is it next Friday? It's next Friday.
Yes, next Friday, same time.
I apologize. I keep getting confused between this and the 101.
It's okay. You got a lot on your plate.
All right.